Hello, good afternoon, or good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our weekly webinar series. I am Virginia. I'm the head of solutions engineering at TeamOhana, and I'll be walking you through our webinar today. And I want to start off just by saying thank you for joining, especially to those finance leaders amongst us or TA Ops folks who um, I want to talk about the reality that headcount plans change and your plan is never uh, seen through 100% as expected, and that's okay. But thanks for showing up and not pretending like this doesn't happen and that plans are just perfect and there's nothing that changes along the way. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about today is why headcount plans change and what you can do about it. So we'll spend most of the time going through a demo where we can talk about practical ways you can leverage TeamOhana to help um, finance and the business stay on top of your ever-evolving headcount plan. But as always, feel free to drop any questions in the chat and check out our resources tab in Zoom for more links. All right, so let's begin here. And I want to start with just a quick rhetorical question for the room. Have you ever had the end of a quarter or the end of the year where the headcount plan or the headcount budget that you had set at the beginning of that period actually matched what you did at the end of the period, either from a number of heads or from a dollar amount? And especially if we're talking about dollars, my guess is no. The reality is that your plan does change. And I think that's okay. We know that they're supposed to, especially with companies that are growing fast and the state of business today. We expect the headcount plan to change as business priorities shift. The initial plan is really just the team's best educated guess at what types of roles that they need, whether they're planning at the beginning of the year or quarterly. And so, as finance leaders on the call with us today, you've worked closely with the business to build that plan at the beginning of the year. And I'm sure that many of you have spent a lot of time at the end of the quarter also trying to explain what happened and what changed. So today we're going to talk about um, common causes of why the plan changes, but then also how you can make it easier to get ahead of those changes so you're not finding out at the end of the quarter or the end of the year. And then how you can also more easily explain those changes using TeamOhana. So just start off again by covering the actual building of a headcount plan. And those are built intentionally at the beginning of the year or sometimes at the beginning of the quarter to help define a budget for the year and also help TA plan capacity. They're built painstakingly with each department, often either in a spreadsheet or directly in an FP&A tool like Anaplan or Pigment. And there's lots of people involved. It's not just the department heads or finance. Usually, HRBPs are also consulting on org design, and talent is eager to understand what the plan is, especially those first few headcounts that are being hired at the beginning of the year. The plan goes all the way up to the CEO for sign off, sometimes all the way to the board. And everything is locked in down to maybe a rough idea of the roles you're hiring, the locations, the start date, or at least the start quarter, and the comp band. But then I've been told many, many times by leaders that as soon as that headcount plan goes live, it's basically out of date. So let's say plan is approved by on Monday, January 1st, and by Friday, January 5th, there's always already changes that are happening to the plan. And these changes are also valid. So teams give us, we hear about lots of different types of changes that you can see. Things like start dates slipping. Maybe they find the ideal candidate, but they want to give some extra notice to their current company, or a hiring manager wants to keep a head count, but they just want to push it out a quarter because they're not ready to start a new project. Backfills split because you have a senior person leave the team and you realize you'd actually rather just backfill with two more junior roles. Another one is offers go over band. That's one that can be very hard to track because you are still hiring for the role that you initially planned for. But of course, you don't always just get the offer right on the midpoint that finance was forecasting. Um, you're over or under slightly. And attrition is also impacting your TA capacity regarding backfills and your overall forecast for butts in seat. So none of these things are disasters, and they all make sense. These are natural, expected changes that hiring leaders are going to make throughout the year. But when you stack all of these different changes on top of each other, that's where you can get to a point where the variance from your initial plan and your initial budget is much bigger than you initially expected. And that's where now finance has to spend a long time, one, reconciling what actually happened and what changed, where are we at now. Even just to get to that clear picture of where we're at now is one step, but then comparing it back to what you had initially planned for is the other piece, trying to give commentary to the CFO on what happened. Um, And so, yeah, the problem is not really the plan itself. We know that the plan will change, but the problem that we see most finance teams struggling with is that the initial headcount budget lives in one tool, whether it's an FP&A tool or a spreadsheet, something like Pigment, Anaplan, Adaptive. And then you've got your approvals for headcount happening all over the place in Slack, over email, in live conversations. And then you've got the reality of what's actually happening day to day, leavers and joiners tracked in your HRIS, like Workday, start dates tracked in Greenhouse. And then usually we see that TA Ops is also maintaining their own version of the plan, trying to keep track of what true target start dates are across all the recruiters, and also what roles are truly approved for filling or not. So at the end of every month, finance is left pulling all of these things together, and they'll only get that clear picture at best of a reforecast once a month, reconciling to reverse engineer that story of why numbers moved. So already by the time you stitch it together, it's already again going to be out of date. You're only forecasting that one point in time. So it's really hard to keep track of throughout the month and throughout the quarter. Um, are we still on plan? So based on all of the changes that have added up throughout the course of the month, do we still have budget to add new headcount or reinvest, even if it's not in headcount and something else, because you're falling behind on your headcount plan or you've changed it and now you don't need those funds for ahead and you can reuse them somewhere else. So because of all these data silos, that's what makes it hard to make these types of decisions throughout the month, and you're really relying on stale data. So for the rest of the 20 minutes of this session, I'm going to go through how TeamOhana can help by getting your plan, your approvals, and your actual button seat data into one single source of truth. And so not three things that you need to reconcile, but clear visibility so that when a manager opens a rec, the request flows through an approval before it touches the plan. So finance is always in control of every change or every headcount request that gets submitted, and how you can keep track when a candidate does accept an offer that's, say, 10% over band. You get live view into how that impacts your overall progress to your plan. You don't wait to month end to find that out. You're not stuck trying to track down HR or pull reports from Workday to understand what a new hire was actually hired at, or even what role on the headcount plan they're filling. And then also, how can you put some more power in the hands of the actual business and have a place to collaborate with them so they're also thinking ahead of how the changes that they're requesting or the additional heads that they're requesting are going to impact the overall budget, or give them clear visibility as to what's in plan or not. And that's really why we built TeamOhana, so you can stop forcing your FP&A tool, your ATS, or your HRIS to do something that none of them were built for, to reconcile data from all of these different systems. That's where TeamOhana comes in to bring it all together. So we'll hop into the demo now. And for this demo, we're going to start by looking at the variance tracker in TeamOhana. So those of you who have joined us before or existing customers will be familiar that TeamOhana becomes that single source of truth for your headcount plan, where we're pulling in all of your live employee data from Workday. We know your leavers and joiners, or sorry, Workday or whatever HRIS you're using. We are also integrating bidirectionally with your ATS, so keeping in sync with how hiring is actually progressing in along your pipeline. And then we also integrate with FP&A tools because TeamOhana has that clean headcount forecast, which we can push out to your FP&A tool. And then the headcount plan itself can live in TeamOhana. So we'll look at how you can build out that headcount plan using scenarios later on. But I just wanted to start there by grounding us that all of the data that you're going to see in TeamOhana's platform today, current employee data is coming from your HRIS, status of your headcounts is coming from your ATS, and really the net new headcount plan, any backfills, any new hires that you're hiring, that's what really lives in TeamOhana. Okay, so let's dive into the variance tracker here. So the variance tracker is an obvious place to start for this session, talking about how to manage variances or changes to the plan. And that's exactly what the variance tracker is designed to do. So up at the top here, if your company sets a total budget envelope for headcount, you can apply that here so that we can see this is the total budget. So the initial plan at the beginning of the year, this is the budget envelope that we're working off of. And here's our total forecast. So this is the reality of what's happening. Based on all those different types of changes to the plan that I just went through, this is where we're forecasting for you to land at the end of the year. And I can change this. So if I want to just see this by quarter, for example, I could view it that way in order to understand what my forecast is to the end of the quarter. Um, and then, of course, we're going to see the variance. So I've got my total budget, my total forecast, and the difference between those two numbers is my variance. So in this case, it's green, indicating that I still have an additional $2.49 million of budget this year. If your company does not set a budget envelope and you're working more from a bottoms up budget, so in that, what that would look like is, let's say you just have a line by line headcount plan approved and you're like, that's the budget. Every headcount itself is its own budget line item. Then you won't have a budget envelope applied. You'll just be working off of a new hire budget. So TeamOhana can actually calculate what that new hire budget is based on all the line by line approvals. And this can be really helpful because we're going to track what was initially approved for you from that starting point. And then as the year progresses, we'll track what changed. So again, so now we get to that new hire forecast and we can show you, hey, since the beginning of the year, you plan to spend 7.46 million. Now you're only forecasted to spend 7.07. And so you've got a variance of 383. So this is just depending on whether or not you have a budget envelope. You can either look at the bottoms up budget to say this is line by line what we planned to do, or you can apply your budget envelope and say this is what finance told us our budget is for the year, and this is how much we have left to spend against that. And this is not just a view for finance. In fact, finance teams using an FP&A tool might have this level of detail in their tool. And they're just using TeamOhana to feed the live forecast into it. But it's really also a view for your business leaders who need this level of detail in order to manage towards a budget themselves. So coming down here is where we're going to actually understand what are the causes of the variance from the initial budget to the forecast. We got this budget at the beginning of the year because we thought we would need it. But now based on the headcount we have planned, we're actually under. So what's causing that? So I come down here and I can see the total forecast. If you're not used to using headcount planning in dollars, that's totally okay. You can look at it just in terms of the number of heads as well. So you actually have the flexibility here to set a headcount budget based on the net number of heads that you're going to have by division, and we'll show you what the budget variance is there. But if you are looking at it by dollars, we can switch to dollars instead here. And here I can see each one of my divisions, what their individual budgets are. And then coming over here, I can see which ones have available budget remaining and then which ones do not. So you can see even though we still have some additional dollars in our budget, our available budget here is quite limited to just a few divisions. And then I think the most powerful piece on this page for the finance team is not just understanding which divisions are over and under causing these discrepancies. So in this example, I can see that sales is way underspending. That's actually a huge red flag because sales is how we calculate revenue. But if I come down to the bottom here, you have your new hire variance. So this is exactly what CFOs are looking for when they want to understand why are we getting off track? What's causing us to get off track? So you can see here we have all of our different reasons where reasons why we're overspending. So early hiring, where we've moved the start date earlier, and higher pay, where we've either offered a candidate higher pay or we've just increased the salary of a specific headcount. So that's increasing our costs and non-budgeted hires. So these are headcount that have been added outside of that annual or quarterly planning cycle. And then on the flip side, you have your late hiring. So where we've pushed start dates out. So that's where we're saving a lot of your in-year fiscal costs that way and your lower pay. So this is where we've changed roles or changed locations or downgraded a level. And so now, or an offer just came in at a lower amount. So there's been some savings there. And just a few quick things on the variance tracker. You can look at this at the fiscal year cost. You can also look at it annualized. So if you don't care as much about those shifting start dates, we can take that out of the picture. You can look at an annualized budget instead, and just look at the ones that are important when you think about an annualized cost. And then all of these you can click into in order to understand the trends in more detail. So if I come back here and click into one of these bars, I'll get a list of all of the headcount where we've increased pay. So coming across in this table, I can see the total variance of this headcount. What did we initially plan and what changed? So this is exactly what we're talking about in the session today. And then what of this variance is driven by date variances, so fiscal year cost versus comp variance. So you can see these are all red since I clicked into the one where we're looking at higher pay. So now I get a clean list of all of the headcount where pay increased over what was initially planned. I can look at that across division, department, location, reporting managers, recruiters, in order to understand some trends associated to where we tend to pay higher than the initial plan. And then again, you can filter this by any time frame that you want. And I also wanted to call out that there's a very helpful column in here, the last updated column. So you can also filter by last updated in order to understand the chronological order in which all of those changes applied. All right, the next piece I want to touch on here is your approval flows. So I mentioned that approvals are an important part of how the plan gets changed and updated over time. So with TeamOhana, all of any changes or additions to a headcount plan, so just changing an existing role, adding a new headcount, or like in this case here, requesting a backfill, will all be required to go through an approval flow. So let's say, for example, I want to change this headcount, I want to change the level. So even though I'm backfilling for an IC level 1, now I'm going to request approval for an IC level 2. We can require justification. And then we can put this headcount through an approval flow. So here you can see all of the different approvers in this flow and any other users that we want to notify of this headcount. So I'm just going to go ahead and submit this headcount as approved. And you'll see that for every single headcount that we are tracking, we have a complete audit trail here too. So that's how we keep track of what changed and when, by looking at our audit logs and also differentiating between our targets, so our target start date and our target compensation versus what we initially budgeted. So the budget start date and budget compensation is locked in at the time of approval, But if I wanted to make a change to this role, let's say I want to make it an even higher role, for example, I can request a change. And because that change impacts the overall compensation, by requesting this change, we'll add to our change log and put it through another approval flow. And this is really helpful for finance because it ensures that not only are you notified every time a change is made to a plan, but you're actually looped into the approval process. So you can quickly see what the impact of those changes are. I can see that in this case, my target base changed from 149 to 171. And I can decide whether or not I'm going to approve it or if I want some more to have a discussion back and forth before I approve it. And again, as a quick check, I can come back to see in my variance tracker whether there's additional budget for this team or for this division in order for me to approve that change. Now, one other piece that goes into tracking the headcount forecast is attrition. So that's something that is difficult to plan for at the beginning of the year. You're not going to add all of your backfill headcounts to your plan because you know people will leave, but you don't know exactly who will leave or when they will leave. So recently, TeamOhana actually launched a new capability in order to help you better predict your attrition and backfill needs throughout the year. So the first piece of this is, or the final piece is our predicted forecast. So if I come into the headcount ledger here, headcount ledger is showing your current button seat employees, your current hires from the year, transfers, terminations, so leavers and joiners, and then your to be hired. So this is that headcount plan that lives in TeamOhana. And that gets us to our headcount forecast for the year. So this is just saying subtract all the known terminations, including known future terminations, and add in all of the to be hireds to our current headcount plan. That's how we get to our forecast. But that's not the full picture. So we know that there are also unknown terminations that are going to happen in the future. And we also know that TA may or may not be able to hit their hiring goals for the year. And we'll talk more about that in a second. So that's where our predicted forecast comes into play. So the predicted forecast is actually um, looking at your actual forecast and your headcount plan, but then factoring in predicted terminations and the time it will take to backfill. So we look at your historical terminations in order to predict terminations by division. And then we look at our predicted start dates in order to say, okay, if we predict this many people are going to leave the business, and then we want to say we're going to backfill at 80%, then we expect that we're going to have to add these additional headcount to hire back for those backfills. But it's going to take 3 months or 2 months, however long we know those types of roles take to refill. So we take that all into account. And then we also say, but how is TA performing? Have they been able to hit their hiring goals, or there are some known gaps? And then adding these backfills on top of that are just going to exacerbate those gaps. So we take all of those factors in order to predict a forecast for you. And if you want to break this down a little bit more granularly, you can. So in the effective headcount report, that's where you can come in and see in your annual view what your predicted terminations are by division. And you can break this down by department as well. So here we have this new column, your predicted terminations that are going to estimate future employee exits based on historical employee attrition. So we're looking back at how much attrition each division, and then I believe it will break down, yes, by each individual department you can expect month over month in order to make these predictions for the year. And that feeds into the predicted forecast. But we're also taking into account a certain backfill percentage and the time it takes to backfill. And then the other piece of that is the projected hiring gap that I mentioned. And so you can see that projected hiring gap or projected hiring shortfall in your recruiter dashboard. So when we launched this hiring gap, we found that pretty much all of our customers did have a projected shortfall pretty much everyone was falling short of their hiring goals. So we definitely want to make sure that we are taking into account the fact that there's going to be some difference between like our very stretch goals in terms of how many heads our head of engineering and our head of sales wants to hire for the year versus the reality of who are they actually going to be ready to hire when it comes time to hire. Um, if they say they have a headcount that needs to start January 5th, but the headcount plan doesn't get approved until January 1st, is that really realistic? There's all kinds of reasons why you might fall off plan that's not even related to recruiting capacity. So this is all factored into this projected shortfall here. And then up at the top here, we can see our predicted target hires, which again is also taking into account backfills. So in this case, I had like a major a trit last year that was not expected, and so we're doing a lot of expected backfilling. If I come back to this channel, we can look at a recruiter dashboard that looks a little bit more realistic in terms of we have 86 headcounts that are in our plan, so are known and planned. We have 68 headcounts that are our year-end projected, so that's taking into account our projected shortfall. And then our predicted target hires are taking into account any backfills that we're expecting as part of our attrition. So you can see how adding on all of these variables already gets you to a different headcount forecast. So everything that you see that's not highlighted in purple here is not including your backfills, and then your predicted target hires is factoring that in as well. And I know this is helpful for finance teams to take into account when they're thinking about their necessary budget, because even though the business is saying they want to hire 100 heads, there's always things like backfills and recruiter capacity that are going to cause variances. So the predictions are intended to help you fine tune your budget based on what you've done in the past, what your historical attrition looks like, in order to get a more accurate plan going into the next year. All right. And speaking of planning going into the next year, so this leaves us with our final piece, which is scenario planning. So when we think about changing plans, and we think about finance kind of trying to keep track of what's changing, another big part of what finance does is help their business partners scenario plan. So this could happen at any point throughout the year where the business leader already has a plan live, but then they say, actually, we've changed our business model, we've added a new project, we're changing our strategy, and that means I have to change. We've opened maybe a new location, all these different reasons why you might need to change your hiring plan. So that's where scenarios comes in. So scenarios allows you to take a live snapshot of your hiring plan and then make changes off of that plan. So up at the top here, I can see my total budget again, my total forecast, and my variance. This is just for the G&A division. So you can see in this case, I'm over budget already. So let's say maybe I want to try down leveling some roles to try and get me back on track. So by down leveling those two roles, you can come in and see that we're keeping track of what we just changed. And that includes changing the target base for both of these roles. And if I come and update my stats at the top here, you can see that I've actually decreased my total forecast by 12K. And my budget has gone down slightly as well. And then if I flip that into an annualized view, I have slightly more savings as well. And so scenario planning is not just for changes that might be happening throughout the year. So, and you can do any change that you want to do here, changing the location, we change the role, changing the target start date. You can make changes in bulk. So maybe I want to push out some hires 60 days to try and save some more in-year costs. I can also add additional headcounts here directly. But you can also use this to actually build out your annual or quarterly plan. So finance business partners can come in here and invite the business counterparts as collaborators, your hiring leaders, and they can actually build the plan themselves and then clearly understand what the plan is going to, whether the plan that they're building is in line with their budget. And if they're replanning quarterly, all of this is going to be nice and tracked for them. So when I go to look at the impact of my changes, I get this really nice change log summary. So let's say you're in Q2, you're replanning for Q3. You'll have, once you go through this planning exercise, you'll have a nice clean summary of all of the changes. And then down here, you'll have line by line what headcount were added, what headcount were modified, what exactly was modified, and how did that impact your overall forecast. So you don't even need to compare Q2's forecast to Q3's forecast. You can actually just get right to what were all of the changes that we did when we went through the quarterly replanning. So that wraps up our demo today. I apologize for going a few minutes over here. Thank you so much for joining. I want to give a quick plug to our next webinar. So we're taking a week off next week. We will be back on June 3rd. So that's Wednesday, June 3rd. And that's actually going to be a thought leadership webinar. So that's going to be a really interesting conversation between Tushar Mahika, our CEO and founder, and then Arthish, who's a consultant in the headcount planning and workforce management space. So they'll be talking about how you can bring finance, HR, and TA all together, how they struggle to be on three different pages when it comes to the headcount plan, and strategies for bringing them all together in a more collaborative way. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to see you next time.